Hello, everyone. Aloha. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are from watching from all over the world. We appreciate you for joining us today. My name is Westin Saito. I'm an educator at the USS Arizona Memorial, Pearl Harbor National Memorial Visitor Center. The USS Arizona Memorial is literally what you're seeing behind me right now in this video screen. My bio said I have over 12 years of educational experience here at the park and interpretive experience. I have literally grown up at this park. My mother was the first National Park Service ranger at this park, and my grandfather was in the water during the attack on Pearl Harbor, actually pulling sailors. So it's a very special place to me, and I'm glad that I can share some of its history today with all of you. And Ralph, I guess we'll get started. How about that? So let me just share screen and all right. So morning, everyone. Let's start, December 7th, 1941, the date which would live in infamy. Also, we have to go backwards as well, too, but I did want to introduce, my organization is Pacific Historic Parks. It was founded in 1979, and we do the education interpretation for multiple parks here in Hawaii. We also have one in Guam, one in Saipan as well, too. So now, when we talk about Japan, especially Imperial Japan, in 1600 to 1867, Japan was actually an isolated nation. It was broken into different smaller little governments under the shogunate. He didn't really have a unified nation. And as an isolated nation, they didn't deal with foreigners or anyone. They didn't allow for trade. But the United States, we wanted to use Japan as a forward operating fueling depot so that we could traverse the rest of Asia from the west coast of the United States. So on July 8th, 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry, that photo that you see there on the bottom, he sails in to Tokyo Bay. And if you look at that photo in the top right, he sails in with 4 steel warships. Okay. And as you can see, the Japanese government, the civilians and such as well, too, comes out with wooden boats. Now, gunboat policy, for any of you who understand military terminology, basically whoever has the bigger gun on the boat and the larger boat usually sets policy. So for that one right there, the United States, we set the policy for that time period, and we forced Japan to open up for trade. Now, because of that, Japan realizes, okay, we as a warrior race, the samurais, the soldiers of their time, some of the best warriors in the world, they cannot compete with a steel warship. It's no longer a possibility. So they need to come together under one ruler, the Emperor of Japan, and he reunites the entire nation under his control and starts negotiating and deals with the United States and the rest of the world as well, too. Now, funny thing is, we kind of put Japan onto that world stage. Within the next 50 years of that first meeting, Japan would start building their own ships. They would bring engineers from all over the world, from France, from Germany, some soldiers from the United States, to teach the art of modern warfare to the Japanese people. But here's the thing. In 1904, Japan declares war on Russia. They attacked the Russian Eastern Fleet near the Port Arthur, just a little left of Korea at the time. And because of that, that 1 year war goes so badly for Russia that they have to actually sue for a peace treaty. They actually call the president of the United States to come over and become the ambassador between these two great countries. Now, let's all be honest, Russia is a major world superpower then and now. So if any country that can fight on par with a superpower, they have to be now considered a superpower themselves, even though Japan is considered the size of the state of California here in the United States. It's quite small. Now, because of that, they annexed Korea, which was part of Russia at the time. And for those you aren't familiar with, Japan was actually part of our allies as well too during World War One. So let's go backwards. World War One. Japan is in the Allies before the United States is even part of it. Actually, about 3 years. They were protecting the Hawaiian Islands during all that time period that the United States moves our forces to Europe to support France and England as well too. And then now a lot of the Washington naval treaties after and the armistice after World War One, it allowed the United States and Great Britain, of the major warring powers, US, France, Great Britain, Italy, and Japan, it really allowed the United States to build 5 major warships, a capital ship like a battleship, Great Britain to build 5, and then Japan to only build 3. I think we can all agree is 5 is usually better than 3. But what Japan does is they see it as truly an insult and a slap to the face. But some of the military leaders, one in particular who we're going to talk about later, Admiral Yamamoto, he understands the concept. He understands that Japan cannot compete with the sheer size of building a fleet in comparison to the United States or Great Britain, that for them to do it, they'd have to outbuild by quality, not quantity. 1924, the United States signs the Immigration Act, barring Japanese immigrants living in the United States or seeking citizenship. And then we have to talk about 1929, the world economic crisis. For the United States, we would call it the Great Depression. Many countries decide, what can we do? They usually looked inwards, try to stabilize their governments. Germany at that time uses that decade to really rebuild itself following the end of World War One. Their factories were still in the state. The United States, we built infrastructure, a lot of our roads and our highways. Japan, to get the natural resources and everything that they need for that time period, they actually don't look inwards, they look outwards. They grow exponentially. They take over Manchuria, parts of China. They are larger than 4 times, they're 4 times larger than the Western seaboard of the United States. That's how large they become within the next 10 years. Now, because of all that, war has already been declared in the European theater with the invasion of Poland as well. But the United States, we're still staying out of it. But we fully will understand that the growing threat of Japan expanding into the Pacific. So we have to now move our fleet to where I am at, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And then the 2 main warring powers here in the Pacific is going to be the United States, commanded by Admiral Husband E. Kimmel, and Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto for the Japanese. Now, as you can see right there, Admiral Yamamoto, he's a Harvard graduate. He actually studied here in the United States. He has a master's in English. And we actually even invited him to attend some classes at the United States Naval War College. Now, you're thinking, this is the man who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. He's probably one of the most brilliant minds in the Japanese Empire at the time. Why am I teaching another country's admiral the United States naval tactics? Well, you got to remember, during that time period, Japan was our allies. And in the Pacific Ocean, the largest body of water in the world, if the United States on the east and Japan on the west work together, there's really not too many countries that can really compete with the combined power of the United States and Japan's fleets together. And then husband E. Kimmel, he gets appointed very quickly before the attack on Pearl Harbor because the previous admiral refused to move the fleet from the west coast of the United States to Hawaii, saying that the island of Oahu, while it is a strategic location and it will be needed in the war to come, which would be World War II in the Pacific, the island of Oahu is not prepared to defend the Navy. And unfortunately, we learned that in real time. Now, I wanted to play you a little clip and I'll do a little bit of narration. This is actually from our virtual reality program here at Pearl Harbor. This is on the deck of the carrier Akagi, actually the head of the flagship for the attack on Pearl Harbor. 6 carriers, just like the Akagi, would launch a contingent of 350 planes total for the entire attack. They actually held back 50 planes just to defend their fleet. Now, those 6 carriers that represented 60% of the entire carrier fleet for Japan. So they could not lose them. They had to protect these planes. I mean, these ships. Now, the Mitsubishi A6M2 carrier fighter, at the time, in 1940 to 1941, and also about to 42 and 43, this is the fastest carrier fighter plane in the entire world. Her max speed is about 533 kilometers per hour. She carries some of the largest guns in the world at the time, 20 millimeters. The Aichi dive bomber now, if some of you guys play video games and you, especially military games where you're calling in bombs and everything, they're laser guided, they're GPS. No, these dive bombers would have to be at about 1,800 meters above, and they would dive down to barely 200 meters. And that's the only way you could direct a bomb to its target. That was the only possible way at that point. It was only by line of sight. There was no guidance. The guidance was the plane itself, and you were diving with that. Now, this is a really interesting plane right here. This is called the Nakajima B5N2 carrier attack bomber. This bomber is the best torpedo and carrier-based bomber in the world at the time. Now, you have to understand the carrier fleets, Japan had the best carrier fleet in the world. And as you can see, it had a torpedo in the first image. This one now carries an 800-kilogram bomb. That's actually a modified battleship shell that they used for the attack on Pearl Harbor, knowing full well that our decks were armored as well, too. So just to show you, this is the island of Oahu. We have multiple radar stations who are defending us. We have multiple Army installations. There are 6 different air bases defending that one area there on the bottom of the screen, which is called Ford Island, and that's Pearl Harbor Naval Air Station. All of this is to defend this one location, to defend the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Japan is going to destroy 5 of these airfields in the first 5 minutes of the attack. 80% of all aircraft on this island would either be destroyed or heavily damaged in 5 minutes. That 80% aircraft represented 20% of all Allied aircraft in the Pacific at the time. That includes Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the West Coast of the United States. 20% of all Allied aircraft was gone in 5 minutes from the first couple of minutes of the World War II in the Pacific. So you can actually see how devastating that attack was. And everything was done almost simultaneously. Every different airfield was hit almost at the exact same time, so that there was no way that the United States could counterattack unless our radar stations were able to identify them. And side note, our radar stations worked perfectly. But if you actually do a little bit of history on radar during that time period, you really can't tell if it's a flock of birds or a bunch of planes. There's really no difference on the screen. So, and remember, this is all during peacetime. The United States was not at war, so we only operated 3 hours of the day. Now, if any of you know your military now, ask anyone, how long do we operate our radar in our country? Every single person in the military will say 24/7, 365. and they're usually operating about 5 to 6 radar stations all simultaneously and not just one. But just to show you, a lot of the aircraft. So Wheeler Airfield is the largest fighter base in the entire Pacific. So all the West Coast, this is the largest fighter base. We had 233 aircraft on there. We had about 150 just fighter planes. Either all of them would be heavily damaged or completely destroyed in those first 5 minutes. Kaneohe Bay was our Marine Corps air station. It had our long-range seaplanes that could also bomb enemy targets as well too, but they were mostly there for scouting. Ford Island, that's our naval air station here. It carries our large heavy base bombers as well too. So if we could find those 6 carriers, as devastating as this attack would be, if we destroyed those 6 carriers, the war actually would have ended on that first day for the United States and Japan. And then I just want to talk a little bit about 2 of the ships here at Pearl Harbor that didn't go back into service. The USS Utah, she was a former battleship during World War I. She was actually the flagship for our fleet when we sent it over to England to support. And by World War II, 1941, she was no longer a battleship. Her big naval guns were taken off, and she was actually dubbed the robot ship. And the reason why is we actually operated her from remote control underneath her decks. And our pilots would have water balloon and bombs, and they would drop it on the deck, practicing their dives or their bombing scopes and such. So the crew would just be playing around underneath with their controllers, controlling the ship, trying to maneuver, make it so that it's difficult for these pilots to try to hit. And surprisingly, this ship had some of the most state-of-the-art equipment at the time available. They were even testing out some of our new anti-aircraft guns as well. Unfortunately, because none of our carriers were here during the attack, and that was one of the main targets for the Imperial fleet, Utah was more exactly where our carriers would be. She would be the first ship to get sunk during the attack on Pearl Harbor. 6 torpedoes were launched on her, 2 direct hits, 58 casualties. Now, unfortunately, that's nothing compared to what would happen to USS Oklahoma. She was hit and she capsized in minutes, trapping over 400 sailors and Marines inside. And unfortunately, the deck of these ships or the hull of these ships are very thick. So you can't just cut through them with a torch or anything like that. You have to get special saws and everything. And then the problem is cork is in between all of these panels to actually insulate the ship. So these torches would just burn them. And then unfortunately, the smoke would go inside and it would suffocate some of these men. So it took us 36 hours, but we were only able to pull 18 men out. That's it. And then, of course, where I'm at is the USS Arizona. When she was built and commissioned in 1916, she was among the 10 largest warships in the entire world at the time during World War I. The naval guns that you see on that photo, these are the largest guns at sea at the time. They're 14-inch naval guns. They fire a projectile about 1,400 pounds, 20 miles, give or take. I apologize, I don't know my metrics on that one. But if you can imagine a small car, like say a Mini Cooper, cut that in maybe half or so, that's what they're firing out of those guns, about half the size of a car. And some of our newer ships that we have now, or later on in the war, they would fire something 26 miles, like the USS Missouri. But the capability of this ship, if any of you ever been on a passenger aircraft liner, one of those big Boeing jets or anything, this ship at its peak could actually shoot you down at 10,000 feet. That was the peak of her capabilities. Now, unfortunately, during the attack on Pearl Harbor, she was not hit by any torpedoes because she was more behind another ship, so she was protected. But a single bomb that we saw on one of those planes earlier, it punched through the deck and ignited over 1 million pounds of gunpowder all at once. And unfortunately, she would be destroyed. She would never go back into service. And surprisingly, she never served during World War One. And her entire combat service was the 11 minutes over the attack on Pearl Harbor. She would go down with 1,177 sailors and Marines. It's the greatest loss of life in United States naval history. And we also lost, unfortunately, on board that ship, 23 sets of brothers and one father and son serving on board that ship as well, too. And then I just wanted to show you another clip from our VRs, and this will show you how intricate it was for the Japanese planes and the planners. Like I said, they would actually come over from the north of the island and they would hit almost every single air base at the exact same time. And it's all culminating over that one spot at the bottom, which is Pearl Harbor. And you can see them all collapsing on that one area because that's where our fleet is. And now right here, you are living the experience of one of these torpedo bombers, these pilots. Now, here's the funny thing. This is actually slowed down. The pilots themselves were traveling about 200 miles per hour, okay, about 30 feet above the water line. They had 6 seconds to fly in, choose a target, pull out in time, and give it enough time for these torpedoes to have about 200 meters for them to cycle on to actually be armed. Because if not, they're not going to arm and they're just going to hit their target and just bounce off and not explode. So this is the USS Oklahoma right here as well, too. And she would take upwards of 9 torpedo hits during the attack itself. Just to show you, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we really realized that, okay, battleships are no longer the standard. That was the standard during World War One. Every major warring nation, Germany, France, England, Italy, Japan, we all understood that battleships were the greatest weapon. But with the added of aviation, planes, and now that we can put them on ships and drop bombs directly, carriers were the newest thing. Now, I mean, look at your history now in any country in the world. Does anyone still use battleships? No, we build carriers. And during World War II for the United States, we built 151 carriers in 3.5 years. We were putting out, average wise, a new carrier every 3 weeks, give or take, if you were looking at that actual math. The fastest we were able to do, we built a brand new ship about 120 meters in length in 10 days by the women who we called Rose of the Rivers. They did that in Oregon. And that was the shortest amount of time it's ever taken for anyone to build a ship. 10 days. It was launched and put into service. And funny thing is, they held back. They had to wait for the president of the United States to come in and get a photo op. So some of the Rose of the Rivers in the state of California, they said, you know what? We can build that ship even faster. They did it in 4.5 days. 4.5 days is all it took for them to build all that. So here in the United States, when the war happened, the attack happened, the president would give his famous Day of Infamy speech, and he would really unite an entire nation that was divided. Many of us still wanted to stay out of the war. We didn't want to go into World War One. We just got a war again, the Spanish-American War. So we weren't really prepared for that. But then for President Roosevelt to rouse the nation and unite us, it really brought in the capabilities of what our infrastructure and our factories could do. I mean, take a small building. One of the bombers that was built, a B-24 Liberator in the state of Michigan, we built that bomber in 63 minutes. So that B-17 is what you see on that screen. We built that in about 80 minutes here in the United States in Seattle. It just shows that, when people, not just the United States, but when people want to come together and we have a singular goal, there is nothing that can really stop the human race. And then this is a photo of the USS Arizona and the Arizona Memorial as it is right now. It is still underwater to this day. That big circle right there is turret number 3, where we still have some of our ceremonies, turret 3 and turret 4, where we any of the survivors from the Arizona, we actually can have their ashes, and it's placed into a small urn, and then a dive team actually takes it down into the waters right over there. And to this day, the ship still leaks about 4 quarts of oil, and she went down with about 1.5 million gallons worth of fuel oil. And if any of you have ever watched the Olympics, those big diving pools, that's 3 Olympic pools worth of oil on just this one ship. So we are taking care of that as well too. We're working with the different environmental agencies about trying to dredge it up, but we're expecting this ship to potentially leak a quart of oil a day for another 75 years, actually. So I wanted to thank you all. Mahalo for joining today and taking this opportunity to learn a little bit more. I'm happy to take any questions. Ralph,
Absolutely.
I'll stop the
Absolutely.
share.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Weston. There were so many facts in there. I didn't even know. I feel like I don't know anything about history after sitting through that. But thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. And you guys, I'm opening up the chat for you guys to ask some questions. I had some questions emailed to me, so we'll go ahead and ask those. And if you guys want to learn more, definitely check out Pacific Historic Parks .org. So someone wanted to know how did the attack on Pearl Harbor affect the local Hawaiian community, both immediately and in long term?
So for the local Hawaiian community, that's a very difficult question because the United States and Great Britain annexed the islands, and they overthrew the kingdom later on with Queen Liliuokalani. And what would happen is we would use it to really build a fleet so we could allow for sugar plantation here. And sugar was one of the most needed supplies in the world um, before war, and it was even worse during war. So before the overthrow, we had a great kingdom. We would use the fishes. For any of you who like pearls, we would eat oysters every day in Pearl Harbor until King Kamehameha the Great made it kapu, which is called forbidden. Um, but after the attack on Pearl Harbor, it didn't really affect the local Hawaiian people as much. The nationality of Hawaiian, but the Hawaii people on Oahu, the local people, the Americans, the Japanese Americans, the Filipino Americans, it greatly affected us. We had martial law put in place. We had martial law put in place for about 3.5 years, and for Hawaii to get supplies over to us, the nearest place is California. By ship, it takes 3 weeks. Now, if you ever think about this, imagine if any of you like your McDonald's, you like your chicken nuggets, or you like your bacon, pork or beef. During that time period, those 3 weeks right after attack, you didn't get that, especially as a civilian. That all went to the military. So you know what you all had to eat? Your vegetables. Yeah, a lot of people were not happy about that right there, but that's what we had to do to survive. And during World War II, we actually created victory gardens. One high school over here, just south of us, they grew about 8 million pounds worth of vegetables to support their community throughout World War II. So everyone had a job. And then, sugar, as I was saying during World War II, how it's very important. Sugar, great for cookies, great for ice cream. Chocolate, no, those are used to make bombs and grenades. So sorry, there weren't cookies or chocolate or ice cream during World War II. We had grenades. We needed that more important. So sorry for all of you who love sugar and ice cream. I love it too. Apologize for that.
That's very interesting stuff. We'll go with a few more student questions that will let you go. This is from Capucine, and apologies if I mispronounce it, but Capucine is from France, but lived in French Polynesia for a number of years. So wasn't too far away from Tahiti. But Capucine, go ahead and unmute to ask your question, friend.
Uh, it was about why the United States has set up the bases in Hawaii. That's very far and from the country. So why they stay here there?
Okay, thanks for the question. I think you were asking why did we set up bases here in Hawaii?
Yes, that's it.
I wish I put up a picture of the Pacific Ocean. I should have done that. If you look at the entire Pacific Ocean, the whole Ring of Fire, what we call it, Hawaii is really centralized, like right there in the middle. And when you think of the time, this is long, almost 100 years before planes really came into a legitimacy. The only way to travel was by naval ships across water. So having a port where it's protected, Pearl Harbor was very special. It allowed a singular entrance in and a large enough port that it covered from any storms or hurricanes or anything. So it was ideal for any fleet in the entire world to seek shelter at Pearl Harbor. And to this day, operationally, when we do joint operations with Mexico, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, even Japan and Korea, they still use our port to this day, and we resupply each other and we support each other as well too. So really, it just becomes that halfway point. It becomes strategically beneficial for anyone to control Hawaii, because then it gives you an operational base to control over half the Pacific Ocean. Now, Japan never really wanted to control Hawaii. They knew that they didn't have the force to do that, but what they wanted to do was knock out our fleet, and they knocked out 21 ships during the attack. They knocked out every single battleship that we had in the Pacific. We were lucky that none of our carriers were in port at the time. This was the first Sunday that none of our carriers were in, but those three carriers represented 50% of all United States carriers at the time. We had seven technically, but that's it. We had the smallest carrier fleet in the world at the time, compared to later on in the war when I said we did 151. But no, thank you for the question. It's just more of a strategic value is why we chose Hawaii. It's an overall strategic value for the entire Pacific Ocean.
Sure. That's your wealth of knowledge, obviously being a historian about this. But guys, again, check out pacifichistoricparks.org. We'll go with two more student questions and let you go. We have Achilles. Achilles in Europe. Go ahead and unmute to ask.
Sure.
Hi, I'm from France too, and I had a question. How long did the attack take, please?
Okay, how long did the attack take? So the attack, best way to explain it. So the first launch of the planes, let's go backwards, was at 0600. The next launch of the second wave of the attack would be at roughly 0655. Now planes, they weren't as fast at the time. Of course, they weren't jet aircraft, and they were trying to save as much fuel as possible. The attack itself, over the islands, or over the island of Oahu, would last roughly 2 hours. That's it. And there would be a small lull in between between the two waves. And within that attack, 2,390 Americans would lose their lives. And as I showed you earlier, about half of that came just from the USS Arizona as well too. So it's a very short attack itself, but it had devastating consequences in the entire world. And it showed the importance of an aircraft carrier, why aircraft are superior. I mean, remember, Army, if you have a great Army, you can control 1/3 of the world. If you have a great Navy, you can control 2/3 of the world. If you have a great Air Force, hey, we're all surrounded by air. You can control it all. And that's what showed the capabilities of an Air Force. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, we have a few kids, and obviously, roughly how many survivors would you say come and visit you guys every year?
Ooh, So this year for our December 7th ceremony, we actually have 5 Pearl Harbor survivors. We have a number of World War II veterans who are showing up as well too. I actually just took a call before this from another Pearl Harbor survivor who we just found, and from one of our other Hawaiian Islands, and he's like, I would love to be in attendance. How can I make that? It's like, let me call the airlines. Let's see what we can do. We'll get you over here, sir. So I'll probably be picking up someone from the airport very soon as well.
You have a very intriguing job and life, because I mean you grew up around it, which is absolutely fascinating. Not many historians can say that. We have, and can you answer how many victims or casualties were citizens?
Ooh, so about 100 approximately were civilians, regular civilians. And unfortunately, most of the civilian population who was killed during the attack was actually from friendly fire from our own artillery. The problem is as you saw how that attack happened, it was a very quick attack, and the ships that were trying to shoot back at the planes, they didn't set the proper fuses. This all happened on a Sunday, very early in the morning, and everyone was still kind of groggy, and this was during peacetime, so we weren't prepared. And a lot of us were using technology and shells that we developed during World War One. So unfortunately, a lot of the shells would end up in the city of Waikiki and Honolulu, and we would lose approximately, I believe it was 73 civilians. I would double check on that later on to give you the full answer, but the youngest I do know that we did lose was a 3-month-old baby next to the Waikiki hotel. So from then on, we would add new technology, tracer rounds and such, and that would be incorporated into our technology for the United States military. Until then, it wasn't really a thing either. So war tends to be something that increases our technology tenfold. We created plasma, morphine, and all that during World War II. We create, aircraft carriers, technology and such like that. We created atomic energy, the atomic bomb, of course. But then that's why, during the Great Depression or any time of an economic collapse, there is no innovation of technology. And that's what made the United States very weak at that time between the wars, because we weren't innovating. We were just trying to survive during that.
And we have one more student question, and Delhi is in Europe. Delhi, you can unmute to ask.
Hello.
Hi.
How did the Hawaiian people and the American people in general recover from the attack?
Ooh, how did we all recover from the attack? Well, thank our president of the United States. He gathered a nation, like I said, that was truly divided. And even before the attack, we were already sending support over to France and Great Britain, our allies, and also to China as well too. But he really roused the nation. And it wasn't really until late 1942 that here in Hawaii that we actually started to feel safe again. And it's really because of the implementation of our Navy, our Marine, our military forces. They were able to push back the Japanese military that until then had never lost a single battle. Until 1942, they have never lost a large scale battle. But it was at the Battle of Midway in 1942 that 4 of the carriers that came here to attack Pearl Harbor, we actually sunk those carriers. And we were outnumbered 2-1 for that entire battle within ships, aircraft, and Air Force. And we somehow were able to pull off a win. And it really roused the American people. And then also, if you ever look into the Doolittle raid, it was a special attack where we launched B-25 Army bombers off of a United States aircraft carrier. It's never been done in history. These bombers usually take over 2,000 feet to take off. They had a runway barely 600 feet long. And this attack didn't do much damage in general, but this attack launched these planes over the city of Tokyo and Kyoto, and it was the first attack on Japan's shores in history. So it really showed that the United States, even though that we were really demoralized at the time, that we were not out of a fight yet. And it allowed our Navy to rebuild. You know, within the next 24 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, we had about 1.2 million Americans go to enlisting stations around our country. And it roused us, much like how the 9/11 attacks roused us in September in 2001. So it, you know, it's for us, it's the American spirit, is how we would like to call it. There's no really way to say, but I'm sure like if you were to go to any country that you live in, you want to defend it, you want to protect the people that you love. And that's exactly what it is we say the American spirit, but we just really want to protect the people that we care about, our loved ones. And sometimes we have to do that.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Before we let you go, is there any advice you can give to these kids if they're passionate about pursuing a career in history like yourself?
Read lots of books. Read a lot, not Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a great useful tool, but you need to always check your sources. You know, students, you're living in such an amazing time where information is literally at your fingertips. I mean, you're getting it right now. For Mr. Ralph and I, we had to go to a place called a library. We had to go get a book. We had to check it out. We had to find the book, and then we had to read it. And then we had to still double check the information. And then one of the best resources you can is something that you're passionate about. Find people who know about it. Ask them questions. People in your own community. Another thing, if you're interested in just like say World War II history, ask your grandparents or your great grandparents. What are their stories? Where were they? I mean, they had to survive that whole time period for you all to be here. So there's some kind of story. Where were they? You know, just learning a little bit more about yourself is going to spark that interest in history, because it's going to tell you about your history. And then from there, you're going to expand more. So always try to learn a little bit more each day. But like I said, Wikipedia, great source, wonderful to start, but please expand on it. Get those books, talk to, you know, historians, teachers. They can give you great advice on where to look for. And I truly hope that you all look for that. One piece of advice, if you ever have a professor who wrote a book, do not correct the professor's book. I did that once in college. I did it privately, conversation, not in front of a class, but he was not happy about that. So please be careful, even if you do know that. So sorry.
Solid advice. And also primary sources of information. So when we're done processing this footage, I'll also send out videos from Luke Conter, Dorinda Nicholson, Sterling Kale, people who've been guests, and we have their stories cataloged, so you guys will be able to see hear from firsthand witnesses who were there and experienced it. So again, check out pacifichistoricparks.org. And Westin, I'm going to end the meeting for all, but before we do, I'm going to allow everyone to unmute. And can we say thank you to Westin Saito for talking to us today about the attacks of Pearl Harbor?
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.